Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us today, for taking the time out of your lunch break for this webinar. We're going to be discussing how to create an effective business continuity and disaster recovery plan. We have two great speakers on the line today. My name is Carolina Kirby-Lucier. I'm with OnRamp. I'll be your moderator, and I'll introduce the speakers and talk to you a little bit about what we're going to be covering, and then I'm going to pass it over. We do encourage you to participate, and I'll be asking a couple of questions periodically through our polls. I encourage you to participate so that we can customize the conversation for you. And we will have a question and answers session at the end of the webinar, so please do input your questions in the Q&A feedback section of your screen. So again, today we're going to be talking about business continuity, and we're just going to start from the basics. You know, what is business continuity? What is disaster recovery? How do these two strategies work together? And how do they play into the concept of business resiliency? Then we'll move into some trends that we're seeing within this space and how they're addressing today's challenges. And we will walk you through kind of step-by-step of how you can begin to develop your own business continuity and disaster recovery plan, or things to make sure you have included in your current plan, and you might want to update the one that you have. Part of that process will be a business impact assessment, a risk assessment. We'll discuss different approaches for disaster recovery. We will cover how to develop your runbook and how to test your plan, and then ensure that you have a communication strategy in place for your internal team if a disaster or crisis does occur. And then, of course, you know, many of you are not running a disaster recovery business full time, so you may need the assistance of a provider. So we'll give you some tips and things to look out for when you are choosing a provider. So joining us today is Toby Owen, our VP of Product from OnRamp. Welcome, Toby.
Thanks, Carolina. Just real briefly on my background, first of all, thanks for joining us today, and just give you a little bit of what I've been doing. First, I would say the first half of my career, I was really an IT operator. You might think of it as being the IT guy for either large businesses. I spent some time in the Fortune 50 for some large enterprises as well as small businesses. And really the last 10 years, I've been in product development, essentially building products to help the IT guy make his life a little bit easier. So I've sort of been on both sides of this issue as well as a number of other IT issues. Looking forward to talking through disaster recovery and business continuity with you today. At OnRamp, for those of you who don't know us, we host infrastructure and applications for businesses, particularly in high security markets like healthcare and financial services. We aim to provide the best and most reliable technology to help keep your mission critical applications up and running all the time. And then we wrap all of these technologies in high security services to make sure that even the most sensitive data is protected. So that's our story.
Wonderful. Well, thanks again for participating and providing your insights. And also joining us today is Samuel Golden from Luminologies, one of our valuable partners.
Well, thank you everyone for joining this morning. I'm Samuel Golden. I'm a principal partner at Luminologies. We are a Pacific-based, Northwest Pacific-based organization. We have both domestic and U.S.-based customers. Our focus areas are IT services, cybersecurity for IT security, and IT compliance. And And so basically we're here today to kind of share some of our insights relative to customers that we've done business with over the last 5 years, and with my experience going back 20 years at different levels of IT service, IT design, or architecture. Basically being able to leverage best practices and being able to share those best practices with all of you, and understanding how best to support both your internal customers, but also minimize the exposure to your external customers. So happy to be here, and thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, Samuel.
So with that being said, we'd like to basically be able to kick off kind of giving you some framework in regards to disaster recovery and business continuity. So just to kind of give you some baselines of impacts that might influence some of your decision-making processes as to how you move forward. There have been several events over the last couple of years, and specifically in 2017, we've seen multiple events, whether they be natural occurring events, basically some of the winter weather that we've had recently in the Northeast, and we've had specific events that have affected name brand organizations, whether it be Amazon, impacting multiple users in their organization or multiple customers due to human error, which is actually a high degree that it actually affects many customers, inducing different events within your organizations. Different outages can both human, both nefarious from a cybersecurity standpoint, DDoS and others, affecting your service from a delivery standpoint. And then we basically have other natural events that basically occur. So all of these things are factors that we have to take in account when you're actually evaluating your risk, and then basically leveraging those risk factors to understand what should basically be your next steps relative to supporting your DR strategy. So why focus on business resiliency? So the understanding is that you want to basically protect your organization against multiple threats, those that are deemed high risk in your local environments, because you first start with what's most effective in your local environment, and then you extend the risk from that standpoint. So high on the list of some of the latest analyses, we're seeing risk associated with, of course, weather events, but first and foremost, but also others that are coming online as high threat events such as cybersecurity and those kinds of things. So with that being said, business continuity and disaster recovery, creating a structured methodology of basically saying how do we actually create processes of maintenance so that the impact both internally and exposure to your customers is very minimal. And basically being able to have a process in place, but more than just a process, but a cultural change to where an understanding that you are part of the mechanisms to basically make sure that you typically don't go into these events, but also when you do, that you actually have a very sound process, a very sound methodology, a core group of people that are very capable of making these transitions successful. And so basically we actually have the ability to support that also within your DR and your business continuity plans that we're going to be talking about further today.
So just to get us started, we wanted to get a better idea of what you have in place today. So which one of these would you say best describes your current strategy?
And remember, this is an anonymous poll, so you're not giving away any deep secrets by answering.
That's right. A few answers coming in here. I'm going to give you guys just another couple seconds. Again, this is just to help us tailor the conversation so that we can better help you improve your strategy no matter what you have today. All right, let's see what we have. Oh, we have pretty even scores here. Looks like some of you have only, data backups. while others have more comprehensive plans or just disaster recovery plans. Many of you do want to work on updating what you have in place. Maybe somebody created it before you came to your organization and it's time to get a second look.
All right. So thanks for the feedback. That helps us kind of know our audience a little bit better. Let's talk a little bit about how business continuity and disaster recovery work together. These tend to be buzzwords in the IT press and certainly with vendors, and so it can get a little confusing. But it really helps to look at kind of the full array of IT assets, systems, as well as people and processes that make your business run. And it's really a cross-departmental effort to both understand the context of your business and to develop a plan to keep it safe if something were to happen. So let's break this down a little bit. If you see the pyramid here, the first top of it really deals with business continuity. Right? This includes designing and creating policies and procedures that will ensure that your essential business functions are available both during an event or a disaster as well as after that disaster subsides. It could include things like replacing staff or moving staff to another location, issues around making sure your services stay available, certainly going through a business impact analysis and dealing with your change management processes and how those might need to change if there's an event that happens. Disaster recovery might be more common if you're coming from an IT background because it's really that part of disaster planning that focuses on the IT infrastructure, right? So how does an organization's IT department plan for a disaster and how will it recover? Whether, again, we're not just talking about weather-related issues, but it could be data loss, it could be a cyber issue like ransomware, or it could just be human error, right? All these things can certainly interrupt business services, and so the disaster recovery really is the plan that would cover that whole array of potential risks to your infrastructure. Why aren't backups enough, right? Backups really are pretty simple. It's a process of taking copies of your data and putting it somewhere in case there's a problem. You can restore that from backup, right? I think everybody gets that. The thing in a disaster to consider, though, is that having a backup may not be enough to get your business back up and running unless you have another location and another set of infrastructure to restore that data to, right? And so the disaster recovery process is a much larger process to take that backed up data and replicate not only that, but the entire computing environment to make sure that your application can continue to function and that your customers can continue to function without a glitch. One last point on this is that not only should your disaster recovery and business continuity consider what happens to those services and how will you continue to provide those services during an event, but also how can you restore those services back to your primary location when that event subsides. Oftentimes companies will get tripped up in I got everything up and running in my backup site, now how do I get it back to my primary site? So that's another thing to consider. So here's some things to consider around why should you have a disaster plan, business continuity plan. There are a lot of them. It may seem obvious, but really the best reason to have a plan is to make sure your business can survive. In the event of a disaster, lost data and sales often are enough to put many companies underwater. If you do manage to survive and recover data, your reputation can also suffer from outages. Even, you saw on one of the early slides, outages in the minutes can still draw a lot of unwanted attention if you're not prepared and able to handle those things. So in actuality, what drives many companies to create a disaster plan is that let's face it, that you're required to do so, right? It might be from your shareholders, it might be through a regulatory agency that oversees your industry. You might even write it in your customer contracts that you're going to maintain certain key services at all times. Maybe a nicer way to restate that point is that having a well-designed and tested action plan can actually be a huge selling point to your customers and your partners, as well as your employees. Ensuring that your business is going to continue to operate regardless of what happens can really help build trust and confidence. So if all of that hasn't persuaded you of the importance either to have an up-to-date disaster recovery plan or to get one going for the first time, maybe the cold hard facts can help a little bit. These are numbers from analysts. In 2017, the average cost to a business, average across small to large businesses, was about $22 million. So that's a pretty substantial cost from an outage. On average, 3 out of 4 businesses will experience one of these outages each year. And so if you think, well, maybe I can get by without a plan for another year, those are your odds. 3 and 4 is that you're probably not. And I think the most compelling number on here is that 40% of companies go out of business if they can't access their data within 24 hours, right? And so that number comes from Gartner as well. Gartner tends to focus on the large businesses. The thought is, well, if large businesses have a lot of resources and they can't even go a day without access to their data, how successful would a smaller business be if they lose their application or data for a day? So hopefully we've convinced you that this is an important thing. Obviously you're on this call, so you already hopefully think so.
You're on the right track.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so let's look at some of the trends that we're seeing in the industry. More and more we're seeing regulations drive requirements for proper planning. These are coming from things, regulatory agencies or legal requirements like HIPAA, or industry bodies like payment card industry, and something that's new in the news, particularly if you deal with customers in Europe, is the GDPR. That's coming in late May. It will start to be enforceable in late May. Article 4B of the GDPR states that you must have the ability to ensure the ongoing confidentiality, integrity, and availability and resilience of processing systems and services. You must have the ability to restore availability and access to personal data in a timely manner in the event of an incident, and a process for regularly testing, assessing, and evaluating the effectiveness of those measures, right? And so they're basically now requiring companies that deal, at least with European citizens' data, to have a business continuity and disaster recovery plan. That's certainly one trend. I think technology is coming to the rescue a little bit here in terms of advancements around automation, cloud technologies, the emergence of disaster recovery as a service type offerings. And the way these are helping really is to make disaster recovery a realistic goal for a lot of people, both because they can help speed the restoration of services and also in reducing the cost to have a disaster recovery environment. The old way was take your production environment and add 2 to 3 times the cost and have that sit running in some other facility, and for a lot of businesses, frankly, that's just too expensive to contemplate. And now, with a lot of some of the advancements we're seeing in the industry, that's no longer the case from a financial perspective. Disaster recovery as a service is worth talking about a little bit. It's really the ability to outsource your whole disaster recovery or a lot of your disaster recovery operational requirements to help you fill in any gaps you might have in your organization. This can be a complicated area to understand how if you're conducting business online or you just have critical systems that your business relies on, how do you take that and make it run somewhere else, make sure everybody still has access to it and your business can still function? That takes a lot of experience. If you're a small or mid-sized business, you may not have that experience. And so partnering with someone that can help with that, either in the planning or in the technology, can really help. Of course, there still continue to be challenges. Budget and lack of resources is the key one. Not really knowing exactly how to go about the task. Maybe it's not a priority in your organization, or not a high enough one to really get some of those resources freed up. And sometimes it can just be a pain to coordinate across different departments, right? And if you bring in a service provider or multiple service providers that are supporting your business, that can get even more complex, right? And then there's the ongoing maintenance burden as well. Once you have a disaster environment stood up, you've got to keep that up to date as well.
So those are just some of the challenges that we've heard from our customers and our experience, but we would like to hear directly from you, what obstacles are you facing? Is it that you just don't have enough people on your team, you don't have that expertise? We would just like to, again, kind of just hear directly from you so we can speak to some of your challenges and maybe integrate that into the later part of this webinar so we can answer your questions. All right, we've got lack of budget. That's always a tough one. Again, budget and resources. Okay, so it seems like maybe we were on the right track with the ones that we've kind of seen before in our experience. Roadmap. How do we get from point A to point B? It's obviously not that simple, as you said. There's a lot of moving parts, and as you're working across departments and working towards that goal, there's many people involved. Keeping a hot site up to date, equivalent to the production site, I think this goes with the consistency thing, right? Just making sure that your different environments are syncing. Convincing management it should be a priority. There's a laundry list of things your business needs to accomplish, and this is just one of them. Of course, your budget's only going to take you, so far, so how do you prioritize those? All right, well, thanks so much for your comments here. I think that adds some valuable insights into what you're dealing with today. So Samuel, if you don't mind just taking us through, how do we get started on building this strategy?
So first and foremost, several of the comments that were made earlier, getting executive buy-in is very important. Executive leadership, understanding both what the compliance requirements are and also whether it be regulatory-based or corporate-based, having that is very important for those of you that might be responsible for either creating, building, and maintaining a DR strategy. So once that's kind of developed and understood, many companies do not currently understand how to actually get from point A to point B. And so part of the processes that we're going to walk you through basically discuss how you actually develop both a plan and understanding and maintenance of the plan, but also how do you continue to show value of the service, right? Because at the end of the day, everything has to have a value proposition important to the business to maintain the service or maintain it reliably. So with that being said, part of the requirements definitions is understanding what's really important for the survival of the business, or what's important for the business to actually fundamentally operate in the event of an outage condition that requires a migration to the DR site or DR services. And so some organizations or businesses actually have a very good ground understanding of what are the applications and services that need to actually be maintained and sustained in a DR site, and all the requisite data that supports it, and all the dependencies of those back-end systems. because at the end of the day, many systems are just not standalone. They actually have other databases or other dependent applications that they feed to or from. And so understanding not only what are the critical path applications and services that are needed to maintain business operations, whether it be payroll for payment of your employees, whether there be some critical customer-based applications to maintain concurrency for business for your customers, either from a sales or operational standpoint. And then other accounting or other facets of your organization that need to be basically maintained in an outage condition. And then how do you prioritize the facilities or services that you've actually targeted for the replication of services in the DR safe? And then as you're maintaining your business operations, DR is just not a static one and done, right? So it requires an understanding of maintaining not only the operational replication of services, patching, and all the different things that are necessary that you do in primary, you have to actually replicate in secondary. And then also the necessary facilities that from an application or service standpoint, you actually have to update those periodically, because as business changes, certain services or applications or functionality would basically be required to either be deleted or added or modified within DR. And so being able to update that, and not only updating the applications and services, but also the processes of both restoration and the testing services that are necessary to validate those services are fully operational before you hand them off to the business. And so all of these things require diligence and an understanding that there's a lot of focus on that. So part of the effort, the first effort is basically a business impact assessment, and that is an understanding of what are all the critical path elements within your organization to help facilitate building out a DR and understanding these are the critical services and systems that need to be maintained. You might have primary systems and secondary systems, and those will basically be reconciled against prioritizations, against restoration, against testing, and those things. So if things don't actually recover as appropriate, you know where to focus your efforts and energies towards to actually get those systems up and running first and foremost. And this is a document that actually will help you, a document process that will actually help facilitate that. Toby?
Yeah, and so once you've sort of walked through your business processes and understand, try to put an estimate on what the cost to the business is, what's the real risk of not having that service available, sort of the maximum time you can have those down for without an impact. We start building that into some metrics that will help you design your disaster recovery plan. So there's a good place to pause and define some more of the acronyms that we love in IT so much. RPO it means recovery point objective. And so this is really how much time can you tolerate a data loss for between backups. Right? You can think of it, if I have an hourly backup, I'm going to lose, in the event of an outage, I could lose up to an hour's worth of data. Or if I do nightly backups, I could potentially lose 24 hours of data. It might not be a whole day, depending on when the event happens, right? But this is really a determination per system or per business process. What is the maximum amount of time that I'm able to tolerate a data loss for? RTO is a recovery time objective, right? And so this says, how long will it take once an event occurs for me to restore that data and bring my business systems, bring my business fully back up online again, or at least those systems that I've deemed are critical, right? So I may have an RPO of 4 hours, which means I've got data that's up to 4 hours old, but it may take me 8 hours to bring that back up online, or it's okay with me that I can take an additional 8 hours, right? And so, and maybe that's way too long, right? So these are targets that you want to set, both for how frequently you need to be replicating your data, as well as how much downtime you can really tolerate until those services are back up online. The next step is to go through a risk assessment, right? And we've talked about understanding the risk of your services being unavailable. This is really understanding what types of events could happen to your business, right? These could be IT operational risks, hardware errors, power failures, running out of capacity. It could be a compliance or security event. Someone's compromised your data, ransomware, denial of service, things like that. These could come in through vendor relationships, right? If you're running an operating system and there's a patch available, what's the risk of that, a security compromise happening because of unpatched software? And of course, the one everyone thinks of are the regional risks, weather-related issues, hurricanes, windstorms. Often big weather events also include lengthened power outages. So these are all things to think through. And it's important that you take the time to go through those different scenarios, because not every event is going to be a complete regional disaster. And so your plan to recover from that might be different. Things to think about in terms of what is at risk, understanding what might happen or what your plan would be around losing access to your office, losing access to your data center, actual loss of data, or just the loss of maybe a third-party service that you are reliant on, like an online payroll processor or your ERP system or CRM. Right? What if that weren't available? There's also lots of information out on the internet to help you with your brainstorming in terms of understanding the risks that might be special to your industry or to your part of the world or the country. Good place to start is within your own company. If you've been in business for a while, if you've got records of things that have happened in the past, that's a pretty good indication that they might happen again. Employees that have been around for a long time certainly love to tell stories about when things have gone wrong in the past, so that's a great place for understanding what might happen again in the future. With respect to weather, the National Weather Service, U.S. Geological Survey maps, things like that can get you very precise data about your probability of seeing a natural event happen. And then government agencies as well, like FEMA, can give you additional data on those things. So now you've gone through and you've understood sort of the risks, the types of risks that you're exposed to. You began to build an understanding of the criticality of your system and how long you could tolerate those services not being available. So the next step is really understanding what types of solutions there are to help you bridge that. So based on what you've learned in your business impact assessment, in your risk assessments, you can now start to have a look at the different types of technology solutions out there. These can run anywhere from a cold backup to tape that you store off-site, all the way up to a hot, active disaster recovery site or even an active site. Additionally, you want to think about where the solution is going to be housed. Do you have another business location? It might be in a different geography that you could use. Do you want to be able to co-locate that information with a data center provider or that infrastructure? Would you benefit from some additional managed services? Are you thinking about putting this in the cloud somewhere or some hybrid combination of those? Certainly all are valid. Your recovery point objective is really going to help drive decisions around what type of architecture you have in place, whether that's if disk-to-disk copy is going to be sufficient, if copying off the tape is going to be sufficient to meet that recovery point objective, or if you really need an active solution. And then your recovery time objective is also going to help inform the technology choice as well. So the next step really is to help you understand the range of choices, and then walk through some scenarios. If you think you're sort of in between maybe a fully hot online backup and a cold tape backup, pick one and walk through the scenario of where you would have your offsite facility, and map through. Here's an example of this matrix of sort of here's the different pieces of my infrastructure and who might be responsible for restoring service in those things, right? This can help you think through the details so that you can start to build that plan. Some things to consider here. If you are partnering with an organization outside of your own, what is their level of expertise or experience with disaster recovery? Are you going to need or want a vendor or maybe a couple of vendors to help you manage and execute this? What is your own organization's readiness for using the technology that you're thinking about, whether that's cloud or software or something else? Do you have proper security measures in place? Something to consider, if you were to either execute a test or you're responding to an event and you failed over to your disaster site, are the proper security measures also in place in that alternate site? Cloud oftentimes is viewed as a cheaper alternative. It may be a great approach for your company, and it may not, right? And so one of the things to think about is that you don't have to have a single technology solution for your entire business. You want to look at each business function one at a time and really make sure that you're building the right solution for each one of those. Ultra-critical services, maybe the main service that you make available online to your customers, might have a very aggressive RTO and RPO, whereas your payroll function, you might be able to go up to a week with a tape backup. As long as you don't lose critical data, your customers, in this case probably your employees, might be a little more forgiving, right? And so you can tailor solutions based on the criticality of each one of your business processes. Some benefits of thinking about partners in this space. One, specialized partners are going to have more state-of-the-art infrastructure. They've gone to the extent of making sure they've got redundant power supplies so that in your disaster recovery site you don't have another disaster. They've typically had a lot more experience and expertise because they focus on this for a living. Probably have more resources. A lot of people are indicating budget. Sometimes budget equals people, right? And so the ability to have people help you with this can be a big saver. And then the ability to customize a solution around what that service provider might be able to offer you. They might have more choices than you have trying to do it yourself. So let's take another look, or take a look real quickly at just an example of what a DR strategy might look like from an architecture point of view. So this business, their primary site is the rack of equipment on the left. Either that's in their own data center or they're co-located somewhere. And it looks like they've got a pretty aggressive RPO and RTO objective. So they've got a disaster recovery site that's within 25 miles of their primary site. They're using synchronous replication on the storage layer, which means the data is written to both places at the same time. It's essentially a near zero RPO for this scenario. And that's going to cover a range of scenarios in terms of service interruption, loss of power, loss of data, human error, things like that, because the secondary site is going to have a real-time copy of everything that's happening. They also, in addition, have a third site, which is located somewhere in another region 300 miles away, and they're using asynchronous replication, which could be a data copy once an hour. It could just be something managed at the storage layer. And that's going to protect, if there's a regional event where their primary site is located, that's probably going to impact their primary disaster site as well, and so they've got some additional backup there. So this is what it might look like if you've got some pretty aggressive targets in place to have some real fault tolerance in your business systems.
Okay, well, thank you, Toby.
Sure.
So basically the transition to all of the different analyses and understanding of what it takes to actually build out a DR strategy, both from an infrastructure standpoint and also a process standpoint is putting that together in some type of tangible plan or plans. And we basically are looking now to develop how those plans are actually created and crafted, and what it takes to support those plans necessary to facilitate very successful transitions from primary to DR. And that's based on what Toby had mentioned earlier, your RPO, RTO, being able to adhere to those timelines of restoration, which is very important because then you actually can define and measure, which is very important, your ability to sustain those types of recoveries based on those timelines so that the impact is actually understood in advance, both to your consumers or your customers, both internal and external, and so allows you to actually develop that based on the plan. Now, no plan survives what they call first contact with the enemy being the disruption. So there's also always deviations to any given plan, and being able to have a team that's flexible enough to understand how to support those deviations is very critical. So with that being said, we'd like to talk a little bit about your runbook development, which is basically a craft of different processes, procedures, resources, and technology that comes together to basically formulate a measured response to any given DR event. You may have multiple types of events that you're trying to protect the company or the organization against. So you may have multiple plans that are targeted specifically against some of those events that have very specific recovery programs to facilitate recovery against those identified events versus one generic large-scale one. So depending upon your organization, you might feel more comfortable developing multiple kind of deviated plans. And some of them may incorporate new challenges to the business, which is basically based on cyber events from an incident response standpoint, or being able to incorporate some of the necessary things that are required in restoration against cyber attacks into your DR BCER plan. And so along with resources and all those things, because a lot of resources are shared between different teams. So with that being said, we basically are looking at how do you actually develop a physical plan to basically maintain. It's a living document, first and foremost. So as you get buy-in to the delivery of DR, you have to understand that basically change management is incorporated within the DR runbook. So it becomes part of the natural cultural aspect that when you're talking with your change managers and all the different change events that happen or occur within the organization, that it's understood that DR impacts are part of those discussions, right? Because you've actually created a BIA, you understand what your applications and services that are being maintained there, and then impacts or to changes in the environment in primary, how and what may be necessary to be updated within DR, whether it be new updates to services, deletion of services, addition of services, a combination of all of those that may incorporate cloud or premise. And then basically at the end of the day, you have to be able to test, so updates of test plans and those kinds of things. So there's a series of events that actually have to take place in order to support that. So with a deliverable document, like a DR runbook, allows you to actually facilitate that. And it's important to basically exercise, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later, exercise the document so that you can actually prove out and validate the recovery program that's built into the document, so you actually have recovery steps based on all the different applications and services that might be there. You actually have a team that have been predefined within the DR runbook, so from an executive level, you have visibility there. You actually have leadership to make executive decisions that you've identified. You actually have people that have been identified that would basically be key implementers of the changes that may take effect, and then you have people that are responsible for validating those services that have been implemented. So it's a regimented process that is very important to the delivery of DR. Okay.
All right, so for those of you who earlier stated that you have either a business continuity or disaster recovery plan, how often do you test it, if at all? I think the question of, how often do you test it comes up fairly often. And, there's no right answer. Sometimes it just depends on your specific business. Seems like most of you are in the category of randomly, when we remember to do so maybe, or when we're told to do so, and annually. Thanks for those responses.
Okay. So the test, validate, and maintenance of a DR plan, as mentioned, touched on earlier, is integral to the success. So as you're doing your yearly by yearly or randomly identified execution of those plans, you are doing several things, right? You are validating not only the process of recovery, but the process of decision making, right? So as you're either doing tabletop test or a combination of tabletop test and real DR disruptive or pseudo-disruptive events, that you either simulating outage of either your full stack or part of the stack that is actually existing within DR. So depending upon your DR testing requirements and regimes that you put in place, you are actually identifying risk factors. So because not everybody would basically be available typically during some type of emergency, you're actually stressing the test plan, the ability for you to meet the timetables outlined in the recovery program, and being able to come up with alternative approaches to solving those problems. And basically having visibility to basically be able to update or modify those plans where necessary, so that in the event of a real kind of event, that you're actually able to not only have tested the plan, but you've also found confidence, which is actually just as important than anything, the confidence that the plan is actually workable, and that you actually have both a primary method of thought following the plan, but you also have the knowledge that you've actually exercised different alternative approaches to events that come up just out of the blue. Things don't always work as advertised. Things don't always work when you need them. So being able to make adjustments to the plan in real time is very important. And so the maintenance of the plan as time goes on, this is the failure of most organizations, that transition of staff, transition of responsibilities, new responsibilities of people that actually were responsible for maintenance of the plan. The plans cause these plans to basically collect dust. And so what happens is that when or if in the event that these plans are needed, a lot of deviations occur. And so from a time management perspective of recovery, you find that you're not able to facilitate that, or missing pieces of information. All the different things that can go wrong will go wrong. And so you're spending a lot of cycles on trying to just recover basic things that should have basically been incorporated on a recurring basis. So testing, validation, and maintenance of the plan is very integral to the success of any business facilitating DR.
And so you go back one.
Is there anything you would add on to that, Toby?
Yeah, I think in terms of some best practices that might be worth pointing out as you're going through testing, the first one really is actually do the testing. You've put a lot of effort up to this point in designing a plan. Testing can be a scary thing. One, it's interruptive, at least in terms of people's time. But certainly if you are responsible for critical systems, the idea of actually pulling the switch and swinging it over somewhere else and seeing if it comes back up can be a scary thing. What Samuel was mentioning, having gone through that and having the confidence that will actually work, or in the case it doesn't work, getting it right before it's really critical, can't overemphasize how important that is. Identifying the right team is a critical step. Really understanding what you're going to test and set some goals for what you expect the test results to be, right? You've set some targets for recovery time objective, recovery point objective. Until you exercise the plan in a test scenario, those are still goals. You don't know if those are actually achievable, right? And so write down who's going to be involved, when you're doing it, what you're going to test. Maybe it's not everything. Maybe it's just a couple of key systems, or maybe you stagger those systems over, one a quarter. Follow the steps line by line in your runbook. Validate all the planning you put into it and make sure it works, or if it doesn't work, take lots of notes. Keep notes of what's happening and what's good and bad. Identifying the types of technologies that you might need to conduct your tests. There are some technologies focused on the DR space that can allow you to perform a full application failover non-disruptively. Sometimes that can make the difference between actually conducting a disaster recovery test and just hoping for the best. Right? Zerto is one of the tools out there that's focused on that space that allows this as a possibility. So that's certainly worth taking a look at. Once you're done with the test, document how it went. Make sure are there things you could do differently to make sure the plan works, or things that you learned during the process where maybe you can bring your recovery time objective down a little bit. The point of the test at the end of the day is, one, to make sure that your plan is solid and it's going to work, and two, it's a learning opportunity, right, to make sure that you can do things better the next time. So really take the time after the test is concluded to get the most value out of it. If you were wondering, was there a right answer to the previous poll of how frequently you should test it, there's not a right answer other than you should test it, right? And so the more critical your systems are, the more frequently your systems or your people change roles or go through revisions, the more frequently you need to test that plan, because in all likelihood it's going to drive changes and updates to your runbook and make sure that you're more successful in the case of an event.
So just to kind of wrap things up a little bit in regards to developing and building your plan and maintaining your plan, is a creation or development of a communications program. And so this is very important because during the process of recovery or during the process of testing, you actually want to have a very good regimented delivery of messages to your internal teams, but also just as important are to your external customers and any potentially regulatory requirement agencies that are necessary to communicate with during specific outage conditions. If you're in healthcare or if you're in financial, there are different things that you have to basically reach out to and notify. So with that being said, ideally when you're creating or building your plan, you would want to have enough internal messaging that will basically provide you pre-established contents for up to 48 hours to support not only your event of recovery. Even though you may target less than 24 hours of a recovery program, you still may have downstream disruptions. And so supporting up to 48 hours worth of, say mostly pre-qualified messages that reduces the ad hoc and, on-the-fly kind of messages that are almost just as disruptive to the potential stakeholders or business owners or customers as the actual disruption itself. If you're miscommunicating to customers or you're communicating at the wrong time in the wrong way. And so with the advent of technology and capabilities of multimedia services, we now have the ability to not only craft those messages but deliver them in different media types that would basically be appropriate to the end user or the end destination. So regardless of the type of event, now you actually have more holistically capabilities to actually deliver those messages out to the resident parties to support your recovery program in a very refined way.
Samuel, and we do have 5 minutes left. I want to make sure we have enough time for questions, so maybe if you could just offer some final thoughts on, if they do need assistance, how can they choose among many, which, it can be difficult to do. So again, maybe just some final thoughts there.
Sure. I think the reality is most businesses and IT departments have, even if they've got some experience with disaster planning, probably wouldn't consider themselves experts. And so it's certainly worth taking a look at providers out there to bring you some help. Things to consider as you're evaluating potential partners: are there service level agreements that come to bear? This can be really critical, because if you're banking the future of your business on the availability of your service, you need to make sure that's in the contracts that you potentially would sign with a partner. Looking at, do they have experience in your industry, particularly if you're dealing with regulatory or compliance related issues? Do they understand the context of your business? Can they help you meet and maintain those criteria during the event of a disaster, and help you restore services back appropriately? And then, all the other items listed up here. But certainly spend the time having real conversations with people after you've done your initial research, and make sure that you feel comfortable that they not only understand your industry and they've done this before, but they're willing to put it in writing. And at the end of the day, you need to walk away comfortable that they're going to partner with you and not just be someone trying to sell you something. Samuel, anything from your perspective?
So not every customer, as Ed mentioned earlier, has the resources to maintain reliable and integral documentation from a process standpoint. And these are one of the areas that you also want to potentially look at how best to support these efforts. And if you know that the resource availability or whatever the case may be is not up to par, then looking at how you can partner with different organizations to help support that piece of it, so that you actually have a reliable runbook or runbooks support your recovery, and then also help you during those recovery processes to basically support the efforts during those times of stress. So that's kind of the last words that I wanted to share out there with the team, and there you go.
Thanks so much for those perspectives. I would like to take the time now to answer any questions from the audience. Again, you can use the participant feedback section and just type in your questions if you have any. We're more than happy to talk through those with you before we get off the call. And we do appreciate you being with us today, and hopefully you got something valuable out of this webinar. I will be following up with you afterwards with the presentation deck and the recording, so that you can have access to that and share it with your colleagues as you see fit.
Maybe for those that didn't feel like they had senior leadership buy-in, this could be a resource to help win that buy-in. So we'll certainly make that available to all the attendees, and hopefully that'll help. Not really seeing any questions. Oh, is there one? Can you go up? Just up there.
Just very informative. Good job.
Yeah, nice comments. Thank you. Thanks for attending, and we'll follow up. The last slide had some contact information for you.
Yes, if you have any questions or want to, maybe chat with one of our team members about how to get started, or have questions about something we covered today, you are more than welcome to contact us, and we're happy to also discuss with your leadership team and see maybe what we can do to convince them to see the value.
Again, thanks for attending. If you are looking for help with disaster recovery or business continuity planning, feel free to reach out to us. Here's some contact information. Again, we'll follow up with you with another opportunity to get in touch with us. Between Luminologies and OnRamp, we certainly have the whole gamut of services to help you with planning, with hosting a disaster recovery site, and anything in between. So don't hesitate to reach out if you've got any questions or we can be of any help. And thanks for your participation today, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Yep, we hope to hear from you. Thanks again.